I mean, we had one evening here. Thursday nights can be quite, we're open on a Thursday night, can be quite chaotic. Sometimes there's a lot of people. If there's anyone who has been maybe drinking, or Thursday nights can be the day when they arrive with us and they've slightly inebriated, and there are all of those kind of challenging elements to it. And there was one Thursday evening here when we had a young mum and her son came in, and they were Goliath members, and they were down to get their sourdough and a few other bits and pieces, and they went to get something to eat. We have meals on a Thursday night, and like everybody, they went up and they got their food. And the food is free to everybody who comes in. And again, it's that equalizing. It's important that we all get to receive at times, and we're not always the giver, but sometimes we receive. So everyone just gets a meal and they can sit down. And she and her son took their meal and made a beeline for the two elderly gentlemen who were both were pretty like rightly in terms of the alcohol consumption that day, and we were just going, oh no, this is a disaster. And then the next thing, we turned around and they're all sitting around having the best laugh, playing games with each other, having a great old time. And there was something in that for me, which is so yes, people's circumstances might change and others, but I don't think, yes, we don't want people to exist in poverty, but that is what happens in this country and the system in which we're experiencing at the moment. There's something powerful about where communities come together, and they're not separated, but they come together, and that sense of belonging that goes beyond your usual comfort zone, and the conversations that you have with somebody that maybe makes you think differently about something. And I think those are the things that we see most often. We see people here having conversations around food and trying something a bit different.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hopenning. This is the place where hope is happening. I am Fran, and I am your host, and I am in Northern Alberta, Canada. And today it's beautiful, as Louise and I just discussed a little earlier. Although it is middle of January, we are at 0 degrees, which in Celsius is lovely, balmy weather. However, my special guest, Louise Ferguson from Northern Ireland, at 0 degrees is a little colder than I am. But we welcome you, Louise. I've been wanting to have you on the show for so long.
Thank you, Fran. It's really lovely to be here. I'm very excited for our conversation today.
Oh, and I am too. And Louise, as I said earlier, comes to us from East Belfast in Northern Ireland. She works with a team of amazing volunteers and run a community food hub called the Larder East. It transitioned from a food bank in 2021, and they are constantly asking questions of themselves and the systems in which people are forced to exist. While they don't have many answers, they're having fun exploring the possibilities with the other members of the Larder East. So thank you, Louise. Right now it's 8 a.m. on a January morning. And Louise, what time is it over where you are?
Yeah, it's just gone at 3:10 here. So yeah, in the afternoon.
Yeah, and it's dark outside. For me, it's dark, and I won't get light for another hour. And I'm thinking we're probably on the same latitude, some close to the ssame latitude, Louise.
Yeah, well, we're certainly seeing, as we say here, there's a queer stretch in the evenings. So as we've noticed after the winter solstice, that it's actually the nights are getting a little bit brighter, which is lovely. Always love this time of year.
Me too, me too. You can see it lightening up outside. So Louise, you run the Larder East. Now, those of us on this side of the big pond we call the Atlantic don't even know well, some of us do if we read, but we don't even know what a larder is. So, Louise, what is a larder?
Oh, well, a larder was kind of an old-fashioned word for a place where you put like a pantry where you stored your groceries and kept all the goods for the house in. So when we opened this, the building that we were in was an old deconsecrated church, but we wanted to create some sort of kind of like a family home. There, a place for the community where there was a kitchen and a living area and maybe somewhere for people to study. And then when we opened the food bank, it seemed obvious that we would need a larder to store the food. So that's what a larder is.
Mhm. So, okay, in your bio, you said you created it transitioned in 2021. So, what were you first? What was the larder first, and when did it first get um, built or begin?
In 2012, we first opened our doors as a food bank. Um, and that would have been something relatively unusual in this country. We're used to having a very strong um, social security safety belt. And over the years, after in 2008, during the big crisis, banking crisis that happened, and we had austerity for many years, um, the social security system had been chipped away at and chipped away at, and we were more and more discovering that there were people who no longer could afford the essentials in life for whatever reason. And at that time, it was like an emergency 4 days where people might have experienced some drop in income. Say they had an emergency, their cooker had broken and they'd had to replace their cooker, and suddenly that had taken all their money and there was no other money to help them with food. Food banks at that time were being set up and helping people cover that, a small gap when things were really struggling. But from 2012 right up until the moment when we did transition to what we call a community food hub, we were noticing that more and more people were not, it wasn't an emergency help that people were requiring, that actually things were just getting to a point where prices were so high and people's benefits or their jobs were not paying enough to meet all their outgoings, and they were just struggling more and more to even access the essentials like food. And food is one of those essentials that actually can be chipped away at for a bit. You must pay your rent or your mortgage. People try and keep their homes warm where they can. Children have to still get to school or have to be so food seemed to be the one thing that people were able to be cut back on and cut out meals and things like that. So that's where we decided we needed to step in and to support people with that.
Well, Louise, what did you do before? Like you didn't always work for the food bank, right? Like what did you
Um,
do before? Like there's a reason that you do this job. Not everyone would take that upon themselves to go, look at me. I am going to give my heart to people in need. What there was something within you, Louise, that created this I guess it's a passion, right? There would have to be a passion within you that creates in Louise or Allie, who is also your kind of a
mhm.
co-founder. What was it in you that you felt compelled to do this?
Mhm. Well, it's interesting. I'm not sure that it was necessarily food as such that was the driving. It has become the vehicle, but it's more a passion about injustice, which I think has always been there. Um, Previous to this, it's a bit of a messy story, but I started life out as a community youth worker. Um, but then for many, many years was at home with at home, I was a stay-at-home mum with my kids. At the same time, I was very involved in my local church and doing things through them. And it was actually through a faith community that we started the food bank. Now my faith has developed. I don't know if that's the right word. It has certainly been challenged, and is in a very different place now. But what has grown is this real passion for justice, and you know, an understanding that actually the systems in which we live are very flawed. And whilst a lot of charities and I think a lot of very compassionate people can sometimes get stuck in putting plasters on the system instead of getting really angry at the system and trying to do something about changing that. And I think it was a bit of a journey for me to move beyond that sense of compassion and wanting to improve the lot of people, to coming to a point where it was about this was an issue of justice. And society not functioning well, people around me getting left behind and ignored, their voices not being heard, and actually a group of systems that just do not work for the majority of people. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is much more, it's not about the food, although that obviously I've become interested in that, and all the ways in which food is something that is intrinsic to our very well-being, and very central to life itself, and the ways in which the systems around food have become broken. So I've become very interested in that, but it comes from this drive, like seeing injustice in society and wanting to change that.
That is so true, right? And it doesn't matter if you're in Belfast or if you're in Canada or United States. We are first world countries. We're first world countries, and yet we see such disparity. If you look, right? If you look, you see such disparity. So tell us about East Belfast. What's it like now? As compared to maybe when, I don't know if you grew up in Belfast, or tell us what it's like, because as a Canadian, and I was growing up in the 70s, when I would hear about Belfast, it was only terrorism. It was terrorism, and it was frightening because you would turn on the news and that's what was happening. It was terrorism. It was like Protestant or the IRA, and there was all this stuff. And as a child, I didn't understand it. And we did not learn it in school. It wasn't something that was being taught in school. And so it wasn't until later, much later now, basically, that I am starting to understand the dynamics of all that might even work into what you just talked about injustice and inequality within systems. So tell us about Belfast, what it was like maybe when you were growing up as compared to what it is now, but still as what you would see there in East Belfast.
So yes, I was born at this very start of the Troubles in 1970. And I was the product of what we would have referred to as a mixed marriage. So my dad was a Presbyterian, my mum was Catholic. And at that time, my dad had to convert to Catholicism to allow him to marry my mum. And so because that was already there, they had moved out of, I suppose, the inner city to the suburbs. We're still living in Belfast, but we were just out on the edges of Belfast, and that tended to be where people, it seemed like a safer place for people like my family, who didn't really want to be involved in the wider political issues. And so whilst it wasn't that I was from a wealthy background as such, but the values of my parents were about, it were not about loyalism or nationalism. It was very much they were they were kind of middle of the road. They would have been what we call alliance voters. Alliance is the party here that was very much in the middle, stood in the middle ground, and that would have been them. So my experience was one of probably observing, like it didn't really, the day-to-day of the Troubles, which was shocking for some of these communities, didn't really touch me. I didn't even really understand the whole concept of, Catholic and Protestant until I was, well into my primary school. So maybe 10 or 11, I think, before I really understood that difference. And growing up in Belfast, it was just an everyday familiar thing to go in to the city centre and have to walk through barricades and have your bags checked and be searched at the entrance of the city. And then going into every shop, you'd be searched again. Being involved in bomb scares whereby, it would be like a fire alarm would go off and you would have to exit a building quickly. Things like that were pretty commonplace. The noise of bombs going off was, it wasn't an everyday thing, but it was regular enough. And where our house sat on the edge of the city was up on the hill. So Belfast is a bit surrounded by hills and into a basin, and we sat up on one of the hills. And so we had a great view. You would hear the bomb go off, and then we would all race up to my bedroom, which was at the back of the house, and you could see the city in front of you, and you were able to then spot where the bomb, you'd see the plume of smoke, and so it would be stories like that. And I suppose I would have heard more stories around people maybe who were in the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and the experiences they would have had, as opposed to people who were actually living, in the ground of these communities where the likes of the IRA or the UVF or the UDA had a real hold on communities. So my experience was one of, whilst I was in the thick of it, I experienced that I was protected from the very worst of what that brought. It also brought, a sense of, so for people like me, I suppose, living outside of those inner Belfast communities, crime was very low because all crime was focused on these two two parties, factions fighting out. So if you were someone like me, you had a relatively, peaceful existence, unless, you maybe got caught up in a bomb scare or something like that. When I moved, when I went to my secondary school, so when I was about 12, we moved schools, and then we have 7 years at a high school. And my school was across the city, and I used to have to get 2 buses, and I would get a bus into Belfast and then a bus out the other side of Belfast. And there would be times when you would, the bus would be stopped and you'd have to get off the bus. And, in the days when you didn't have a mobile phone or anything, you'd suddenly find yourself in the middle of Belfast somewhere, having to kind of walk and find your way home. And when I think about that now and think of all the age that we were, that kind of horrifies me, but it was just normal at that stage. So it was, it was our life, and we didn't think anything differently about it. But then in the 90s, we were obviously very fortunate to have lived through the Good Friday Agreement, and to experience all that and the joy of that and the hope that there was at that time. And it was a time of real optimism. And it really changed because, suddenly you didn't have to get searched on your way into Belfast. There weren't patrols, army patrols around the streets, and, checking cars every so often. You didn't have any of that. And it was a lovely time. But again, when you come into these local communities now that were so riven, the UVF, and particularly in East Belfast, UVF still have a very strong hold on these communities, but it has now moved into much more of a criminal gangs, it's like, and drugs. so as you discover, all these things really are about power and control. I'm not sure how far, um,
Yeah,
but a sense of, yeah. I mean, there's a strong sense of people wanting to be British in these communities. That is certainly true. But it's at the expense of any thriving for people, and the identity of someone's identity in these communities has been so used as a way to keep them from looking for more for themselves or their families. It is extraordinary. It's so frustrating to see, actually, how people they will vote against any benefit for themselves in order to ensure that they remain British,
isn't
or
that
that
interesting?
those kind of rights are not taken away from them. And meanwhile, the leaders in these gangs use it as a way of making more money and
Of
entrapping
course.
people into drugs. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very simplified thing of what's happening, but there's that sense of the identity politics is so huge here. It's really hard to push beyond that.
And I think, Louise, it's happening in many democratic countries right
Yeah.
now around
Mhm.
the world, whether it's Northern Ireland. I don't even know if I am allowed to call you Northern Ireland anymore because it's all one, right? Is
So
Ireland all one?
no, no. So yeah, Northern Ireland would be correct. If you're from the nationalist community, you would say you're from the north of Ireland.
Right,
If
right,
you're from a unionist community, you say you're from Northern Ireland, and you're British, very definitely British.
right, right.
Um, there'd be a big shift now for people here to view themselves as Northern Irish. That would be their identity. Um, and there's also a bigger shift of people who would be much more comfortable now stating that they were Irish.
Right.
Um, so that certainly there is a swing away from Britishness, which probably means that those with a British identity probably feel much more frightened and threatened,
Right,
because they can see, the natural swing is to move away from that. I
right.
think particularly in the last few years, when the behavior of the British government maybe has not been, like, it's, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
disappointing, to say the least.
Well,
So
I think many governments are disappointing,
yeah.
right? And that's why grassroots people like you and me, it's up to us really to make the difference. I think it's up to us to make the difference and not rely on governments. And I think what the Larder is doing, it's a prime example of how a grassroots movement, and it might have started in a faith movement with through your church, but like you said, you've moved away from some of the religiousness of it
Mhm.
and gotten more into the humanity part of what you do. So in 2021, when you changed from being a food bank into the larder, what what's what created that? What created that movement in you to, to know we need to do something different? Like, and what did you do that was different?
Yeah. So, I mean, for I think since very early days, we had become uncomfortable with the sort of the charity model that was the food bank. And I think that just didn't sit well with us. But for a long time, I suppose we weren't in a position to do much else than, um, than to ask people to help support us, so to donate food and then give it away. Um, but we were challenged, I think, a lot of to think that that's, charity done like that is not, it stops short of asking the bigger questions. So Gustavo Gutierrez says the poverty of the poor is not a call to generous relief action, but the demand that we go and build a different social order. And I think that is something that has really spurred us on into, like, what does that look like? Um, how do we build a different order that serves all of these people? And we began to think, right, if we wanted to move away from a food bank, what would that look like? Well, it would look like more of a shopping type experience for people. The opportunity to access food at a price that they could afford, without having to jump through a million hoops about saying whether they were worthy to receive that food. And I suppose that was our first thinking of it. But then when the time came to actually make the change, and we were making it just after COVID and lockdown here, and during lockdown, food banks became the charity of choice in this part of the world. And we actually left lockdown with quite a wee bit of money in the bank. And it was that money that allowed us to sort of think, right, well, okay, now's our opportunity to really change things. So we decided to invite people to become members. Those people who'd been using us at food bank become a member. They would pay a small fee for the year, and then they could access a weekly grocery shop with us. But then the question starts, so what does that weekly grocery shop look like? You know, is it just whatever people in the community around us want to donate? Or can we give people the dignity of having like a range of goods that they can access? So the first sort of thinking was, well, if we could purchase in bulk, we could buy a range of goods that are always here and available. But the next question is then, well, what kind of food is that? Is that just tinned food, or can we give people fresh food? And then, you know, you get into questions about how a lot of the supermarkets get rid of their fresh food by giving it to food banks and to community food groups and all of those sorts of things. And then, and this is where it keeps going, this is why I talk about the questions, it just keeps coming. So, well, why is there that food? Why are supermarkets offloading their waste onto the very poorest in society, which is basically what they're doing? Because often the food that you get left over from supermarkets isn't the best quality. You know, it's maybe going out of date. And it's not allowing our supermarkets are taking no responsibility for the amount of waste and their poor waste management. And people in our communities like ours are supposed to be grateful for getting, you know, handouts like that. And so we decided then, well, okay, no, people need access to good fresh food. Well, where are you going to get that good fresh food from? Who in your society do you want to work with? And then it's like, well, really that should be from local businesses. You know, our local businesses are being outpriced and outmaneuvered by big business. We had read about community wealth building, about by shopping local and keeping your spend local, you can improve the local community. And we had seen, you know, small businesses really struggling to keep going, and we thought, well, you know, is there a way we can work with them? So we then struck relationships up with small local businesses, and whilst it cost us more money to shop with them, it fit with our philosophy of community wealth building and staying local and thinking about the planet and, you know, climate change and what kind of food we were giving people. And yeah, and I suppose one of the things that was very instrumental in our thinking was that we found ourselves one day at a weekend for community food hubs. We thought, sounds right up our street. That's what we called ourselves. This should be perfect. And when we went, we discovered that actually, no, this was community food hubs these were small growers who were producing really great quality food, caring for the land and nurturing the land and doing all sorts of wonderful things. And they were trying to find their way to market. And Ali, my colleague, and I found ourselves in the midst of this group going, this is not kind of what we thought we were in for. And they were talking about, we were sitting in the middle of beautiful Irish green countryside, and they were looking out the windows and decrying this terrible green desert. We were like, what are you talking about? I don't understand. And they were saying that, you know, our land has been so depleted, you know, of nutrients, you know, that even the food that we get is losing its nutritional value, you know, And the way we force our farming, the way we do farming, and all the difficulties there are, there was just all these things that were coming at us. And so the Larder Community Food Hub really is a way of us trying to address in a very small way some of the difficulties in the system that we have seen. So that includes using local suppliers, going direct to some small producers and buying off them. We pay the going rate. We're not looking for charity because these guys are the least able to afford, to be giving stuff away. And yet they're asked to all the time. So we always go in going, this is a business relationship that we want to have with you. And so we want to purchase off you so that you thrive, and we want to thrive. And whilst it's an expensive way of doing things, particularly for a charity, what it does is it is proving that their proof of concept is there, whether it is quite worked out yet. The proof of concept is that this can, there is an appetite for something different. We have relationships with the young couple who provide all our eggs, and these are pasture-fed hen eggs, so with a nutritional quality that you would not get in your local supermarket. We have a relationship with the local artisanal baker who bakes us our sourdough breads. And again, it's the idea that often our white bread is some of the most highly processed food that we get, and yet bread is one of the whole concept of bread being the essence of food. We talk about breaking bread together and having a meal together, and yet the bread that we now have is of such little nutritional quality. So we're trying to offer people sourdough bread and all the good gut microbes that come with that, and all the gut health there is. And so there's a real mixture of questions around health, questions about farming, questions about social the disparity in people's financial situations, and we just, where we see it, where we can make a little bit of a difference, or where we can try to do something that fits with our values, then we do it. But it's very messy. It's not a completely worked out model as yet. And we're still trying to, we're still asking more and more questions. But it's like, how do you create something? It was Buckminster Fuller said, you can never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change things, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And I think, that's what it's just like, well, how can we create something that we would like to have and prove that it can be done? And then we can, hopefully it'll sit as an example to others, or as a guide to others, or as it's not that we haven't it all sorted, but that other people would be inspired by it, maybe to try something new themselves.
Well, when I visited you in Northern Ireland in June, the meal that your community hub, the Larder, served to me was one of the nicest meals that I'd had in Northern Ireland. It truly was. When our big group of people, I think, I don't know, you probably have a better idea than me, maybe 20 or 25 of us came in.
Yeah.
We had we had small tables to sit at. It was like a restaurant. It was like a restaurant, except it had that cozy feel, like you're talking about, of a home, and tablecloths and cutlery, like the real stuff. It was like it wasn't like a food bank at all. So explain what the larder is like inside. I can see behind you that you've got the light coming through your window. So what's the larder like inside? And when an ordinary human like me would walk through the door, what do I see?
So if you come into the larder, if you can imagine, just like it's a disused church building. So it has the height of a church. All the pews have been removed, but there are little bits and pieces around, like the pulpit still is in place. Some of the decor is still there from the times when it was functioning as a church. And there are little nods to its the baptismal font is still there. So there are little nods to its origins as a church building. But when you come in, one end of the building has been set up like a shop, where people can access their grocery shopping from. The middle section of the building has tables and chairs, like you were saying, and it's like our community space, and it's where we do everything from. So there is still a faith community that gathers here on a Sunday, and they meet there. But there's also, it's a place where people can sit and have tea, coffee, home baked goods, all sorts of things during the day. And then the other end of the building, there's a kitchen, fridges and freezers. We even have a fridge freezer in the old pulpit. And then we have a little workspace, which is where I'm sitting now, and a storage area. So we do pack a lot into a building that is really, it was not created for this purpose, but we make it work. And people do tell us that they feel very welcome here. And I think that's, there's something in that. And I think that sometimes spaces take on, maybe it's the values or something, but there's just something that people seem to, that I don't think is down to any individual here in the Larder. It's just, yeah, it's like, I think sometimes groups of people can just bring that together, and you get the right group of people and the right values in place, and that does come through to people, which is really lovely. And also means that you don't feel it's not your responsibility to be welcoming every single person, that actually the building does that for us as well, which is really lovely.
How do you hire people? Like, you have employees that work with you as well. So who do you hire? Is it people from the community, or is it like, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's a team of two. So Ali and I are both full-time at the Larder, and then we have a few people who come in and they are sort of contracted in to do little bits and pieces. Ali really is responsible for all the social media stuff, and between the two of us, we kind of manage the project. It's always nice to have someone to fire ideas up against, and have someone, supporting you when you're doing stuff. So it's great to have that kind of joint management. But Ali also, say, is very responsible for all the social media, and actually the way our profile is out in the world, which I think has been very helpful for us, because it's not always an easy model to explain. The things that we're trying to get across are quite, deep, and yeah, take a bit of like unpacking and and thinking through. So Ali's strength is in getting that messaging across, and encouraging people to kind of think outside the box. And then we have Andrew, who is our money guy, and he comes in. He's self-employed. He'll come in and do a bit of work around debt management and that kind of stuff with people. And then we have Alison, who is our community. We call her our community pastor. And I suppose, yeah, some people have balked at the religious imagery of that, but it really does sum up what we, our community chaplain. So I should say community chaplain. But it's this sense of having somebody who's there to really keep an eye out on people coming in and out, because some of these people will, it might be their only interaction in that day. Most people here have very challenging, difficult lives and experiences going on around them. So having Alison just to be there as like a listening ear, and also help guide people if they need further support or help, is just you know, is just great. And Alison is someone of faith, but not she's also there about, you know, thinking about I suppose the spirituality of people, as opposed to, so thinking of the whole person, as opposed to the idea of being a chaplain to anyone of a Christian faith. It's much more broader than that. And then we have Michelle, who is our community gardener and herbalist. We're very lucky to have Michelle. So we have a very small community garden here, but what Michelle does is she is able to link us with the actual growing of plants, and through her herbalism also educating us around the power of plants, and, you know, getting much more into the kind of sense that we've all lost something by our lack of connection with the soil. And Michelle is really helping us to connect into that again. So in some ways it's maybe a little bit woo-woo and over spiritualized, but there's something very powerful in people learning you know, the power of the plants that we have and seeing it grow. And there's a real message in the fact that things that grow right outside our door and in abundance can actually have such a powerful effect in helping us. I mean, one of the things that Michelle does is she has this tincture that she creates with chickweed, which is a, you know, common weed around here. But what people don't realize is that in the right way, chickweed is really good for eczema and, you know, skin complaints and skin dryness. And you know, and yet it's just growing like it's weeds. And there's something, I think, just in that, the imagery of the weed being the thing that people are discarded and forgotten about, but is actually has something really powerful to
So
say to us.
much imagery in that. That
There,
is the essence,
yeah.
right?
Oh, there is
That is the essence
absolutely.
of what you guys do. There's so
Mm,
much essence in that. They're struggling. I know what a chickweed is. Uh, if you're a farmer, you know what a chickweed is. It's horrible. A
yeah.
chickweed is horrible. It gets into everything and it's so hard to get out of. But I mean, um, if you're saying that the tincture that you can make out of it is it helps to heal,
Hmm.
um, you know, there's a purpose for it. There's a
Yeah. Oh no,
purpose for every human that walks through your door,
absolutely.
whether they're a user or whether maybe they're an abuser of something. Every human being has a spirituality,
Yeah.
as well as, I believe, every plant,
Hmm.
every piece of soil, every,
Hmm.
you know, I'm a believer that God is in everything,
Yeah.
right? God is in
Yeah.
everything if we only take the time to look.
Hmm. And there's something, yeah, Michelle is able to just really put us in touch with that, you know, that the power of the soil. And there, I think, particularly around food, there is a lot of maybe it's not gatekeeping as such, but there is a lot of food that well, certainly we find this country, you know, um it becomes like a class issue, where that those with money and middle classes might, well, they can expect to be, you know, going to the artisanal baker and getting their sourdough loaves at whatever cost. And you know, you can afford your organic food and your organic vegetables, and you can afford to take a stand on all of these things. And you can have conversations about food and cooking and enjoying, you know, and sharing recipes and all of that kind of stuff. But when you are experiencing poverty, then suddenly those kind of conversations and that kind of language is lost to you, because food becomes something about what can I afford. And we all know that, you know, the cheapest calories are found in, you know, like ultra processed food. And um you know, so there's a real gap even in that whole concept around food. And you know, people in these communities would never have dreamed of like going to a herbalist or anything like that. And yet, you know, Michelle is able to chat to people, and she, every Thursday evening, she comes and she makes up a herbal tea from plants that we have outside, and she shares it with people and then tells them about, the plants that are in it and what the benefit they can do to your body and how they help. And yeah, so it's been a wonderful thing to fit into the bigger scheme of what we do here in the bigger project.
And humbling, I bet.
Yeah.
It must be so humbling to just actually sit down with people who are struggling because they can't go to the normal grocery store and buy whatever that other people are buying. Just humbling to sit down with them and listen to their story,
Yeah.
just to their story, because I think that so many of these people are so pushed off in society. Like you talked about it before, social injustice, where, okay, I will contribute money and so that they can get some, cans of food from the food bank. But I don't want to see them in my neighborhood. I
Mhm.
don't want to see them lined up outside a food bank. I don't want to see their tent in my neighborhood. And I understand that to a point, but what do we do? How do we do it? And your quote by the last quote that you said, can you say that quote again?
Yeah, certainly. It's the poverty of the poor is not a call to generous relief action, but the demand that we go and build a different social order. Mhm.
Yeah, we have
Mhm.
to, because it's not going away. Like
No.
the price of food, is even hitting, well, it's hitting middle class now, the price of food.
Yeah.
So I see it all the time. Being a single person with no children at home, I I have opportunities to buy food that the person beside me maybe doesn't, who's
Yeah.
got three little kids and maybe not in a financial position to be able to buy the food that I can. So they're buying, instead of buying a big jug of milk, they're buying a small thing of milk and pop because pop is cheaper, right?
Mhm.
Or cola. Or instead of buying a nice, the full bread, the bread that it's got lots of, the whole grains and stuff. You're
Yeah.
buying the white bread that's, you and I know this, but they're still feeding their family. But like you talked about, the nutrition isn't there. So there's so much that goes into this whole philosophy that you're talking about, that it's not about charity. The word charity should be changed to love, because we have now associated the word charity with a handout,
Mhm.
but it
Yeah.
should be, the word charity actually means love. It means love. And so what's our job? Like, Louise, what's our job? I mean, you're doing it. You're showing that, and I'm not going to say religious because it's apart from that. It's that love. It's love in action, where by the grace of God, I am where I am today. By the grace of God, and color of skin, and people gave me a step up in the world because they were able to, but not everybody had that. Not everybody had that opportunity, or maybe somebody took the wrong path, right? Or not the wrong path, but just a different path that ended them up um, needing that help, needing a little bit of help right now. So you're not pastor, you're chaplain that sits
Mhm.
down and actually listens to people and their story, right? That is able to take the time, and she's employed by the Larder East to sit down and listen to these people's story. I think that act of love is what we're called to do. Just to acknowledge, listen to people, and that builds community, that builds bonds, that builds connection, that builds community. So, have you got any stories, Louise, of how the larder or what you do at the Larder has changed people's lives in a way that set them on a different direction, and to maybe a place where they're able to not have to accept charity or accept anything, but be able to give back.
Yeah, well, I suppose we certainly have a number of our volunteers here who have used the larder, as a food bank, and then would still use the larder as the community food hub and our members here. And we encourage active membership. So, and then people come forward, they have found a home here and a space here where they belong, and then they volunteer with us. And that has been a very important part of how we function. I mean, we also we have a separate membership called Goliath membership. So Samson membership is for those who were people who had who were experiencing financial distress, and then Goliath membership is for people who haven't been outpriced by the supermarkets, and they can come along and shop here, and they pay full price, and then some of that money goes to supporting the others. So I suppose the biggest thing that we try to do is just create a normalcy of community across socioeconomic boundaries. And shopping times are exactly the same for both Goliath members and Samson members. There's no special treatment given. Goliath members have to queue up just like everybody else. They come and they sit in the same space as everybody else. And so the changing happens on both sides, if that makes any sense. So, I mean, we had one evening here. Thursday nights can be quite, we're open on a Thursday night, it can be quite chaotic. Sometimes there's a lot of people. If there's anyone who has been maybe drinking, or Thursday nights can be the day when they arrive with us and they've slightly inebriated, and there are all of those kind of challenging elements to it. And there was one Thursday evening here when we had a young mum and her son came in, and they were Goliath members, and they were down to get their sourdough and a few other bits and pieces, and they went to get something to eat. We have meals on a Thursday night, and like everybody, they went up and they got their food. And the food is free to everybody who comes in. And again, it's that equalizing. It's important that we all get to receive at times, and we're not always the giver, but sometimes we receive. So everyone just gets a meal and they can sit down, and she and her son took their meal and made a beeline for the two elderly gentlemen who were were pretty rightly in terms of the alcohol consumption that day, and we were just going, oh no, this is a disaster. And then the next thing, we turned around and they're all sitting around having the best laugh, playing games with each other, having a great old time. And there was something in that for me, which is, so yes, people's circumstances might change and others, but I don't think, yes, we don't want people to exist in poverty, but that is what happens in this country and the system in which we're experiencing at the moment. There's something powerful about where communities come together, and they're not separated, but they come together, and that sense of belonging that goes beyond your usual comfort zone, and the conversations that you have with somebody that maybe makes you think differently about something. And I think those are the things that we see most often. We see people here having conversations around food and trying something a bit different. We see people encouraging each other to take a meal pack, and our meal packs have all this different ingredients in for a meal to be made. And quite often there's something that's maybe a bit out of your comfort zone, something you wouldn't have tried before. And we see people, engaging with that and getting excited about it, and really enjoying that. And so there is a natural sharing of life in a way that people don't always get to experience, because there are groups of people who would not normally exist in the same space, and this is where this, we exist in the same space here. So yeah, like I'm not sure I could pull anyone out who has had a remarkable transition and things have all worked out well. But I can ruminate over many, many stories of people interacting and becoming community and engaging with one another, and maybe slowly having things challenged or thinking differently about something, and that goes both ways. So it's really a sense of where there's give and take on both sides. We can both give and we can receive. So and that's for everybody who is a member here.
Beautiful. So if money weren't an issue, for the Larder, what could you see yourselves? What could you see for the future?
Oh, I think the dream would be really to have a space that has a shop front, and that we could have like a proper shop, like a little mini supermarket, that anybody could access, and that people would be able to access the food there at a price that they can afford, which and that's different for lots of different people. Even people who are experienced that are having financial difficulties don't all need to receive free food or very cheap food. It may be food at 75% off or 50% off, and in that way be able to sort of share the burden of purchasing the food. And so something like that, now that being able to manage all that requires a lot of money in terms of computer systems and getting, things like that set up. And then having a community space like we have, and the kitchen, and maybe a chef who could come in and really, get creative with the food, who would help us make sure there's no waste, who would be engaging people in how to cook all of this stuff. And so that would be the thing. And then more land where we could grow more of our own food and engage people in that. So that would be some of the things that we're, really excited about. And certainly the direction of travel for us is the direction of travel. But as you say, it all costs money, and we're just looking to see how we can fund that kind of project and really get it off the ground somewhere where people, we're thinking about our environmental footprint, about the health of the people who are accessing the services, and just about a space where people can really enjoy food and enjoy community.
And just to experience, I know you're having a hard time keeping your building warm today, because you live, well, your building is a big church with a high ceiling, and in Canada here, we're used to, forced air furnaces or boiler systems or whatever. So you're having a harder time keeping warm today. But just to have that experience, the beauty of community coming together, sharing food, sharing stories, sharing my life with your life. I think that's just so beautiful. And what you've created at the Larder is beautiful. So anyone who listens who is going to Britain or is going to Ireland or going to Northern Ireland, because I just love Northern Ireland. If anyone who has got an opportunity to stop in at the Larder, come and see what Louise and Allie have created there with her community, and how they're helping the people there, and the way that people are just welcomed, cared about, and treated as beings that belong, people that belong, right? That's beautiful. Yeah. So we're the Hopenning, and what's your last message of hope, Louise, for our viewers, or maybe people who are experiencing hard times right now?
I think I think it's very it can be very easy to become disheartened when you're reading the news and seeing all around you. But when you focus on the things that you can do and that are right in front of you, I think that's where I find my hope. And when I'm engaging with people and not engaging, the people that are in front of me, the things that are in front of me, and doing those things, I see a lot of hope for the future. And lots of people that we've come across here are working at the grassroots and just trying to change the system one little bit at a time. And it is, there's a lot of joy and I hope. It's the little tiny seedlings that are that just make the difference. So
And that is what joy is, right? It's tiny moments of happiness that you collect together. You just collect all these tiny moments, and pretty soon it's called joy. And just living in joy as much as possible. And with people like you, Louise, that help create those moments for people who might not experience that, my kudos to you. And thank you for being a guest today. And it's been truly an honor to have you on. And all my my blessings to all the work that you do and the people that work with you and that come in. And you know, all we need to have is a vision. Whatever your vision is, once you've got a goal set, I think there's enough positive energy out there and in the world that the road becomes easier to see. Yeah. Well,
Oh, well,
thank you.
listen, thank you for having me, Fran. It's been such a joy. I'm sorry it was so hard to get us pinned down to a date, so I'm glad we made it in the end. But
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And for those of you that are first-time viewers, thank you very much for watching. And if you like, please subscribe. And I will put in the show notes all the ways that we can contact Louise. Louise, where can we find you on social media or your website or any of the rest of that?
So the social media is the larderbelfast.com. I'm trying to remember what all our Larder East on Instagram. Ali is shouting at me. So Larder East on Instagram.
Yeah, and I'll put them in the show notes as well.
That's
So
super. Thank you so
yeah,
much.
you're welcome, and good luck with all you do, and may all good things happen for you in 2025 and beyond.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Fran. Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.